I think we're live now. All right. Good evening and welcome to Counsel Live. I'm Kristen Hagen and we're going to be discussing how do carbohydrates fit into a healthy diet. So just a little bit about me before we start. I'm a registered nurse and a registered dietitian, and I love talking about healthy eating and food and healthy living and just helping people enjoy greater health and well-being. I mostly work in corporate wellness, but I also do one-on-one counseling and I teach children's cooking classes. Lots of fun. You can find me on the Kounsel app. So, carbohydrates. There is a lot of talk about carbs these days, and there's a lot of seemingly new weight loss diets that either limit or severely restrict carbohydrates. So I'm really eager to address this topic of what role carbs play in a healthy diet, because I know there's just a lot of confusion and misinformation out there, and my clients almost always have lots of questions about carbs. Okay, so let's just start with the very basics. What is a carbohydrate? Well, the name carbohydrate just means hydrated carbon or a combination of carbon plus water. So all the food that we eat can be broken down into three components: carbohydrates, proteins, or fats. And many, if not most of the foods we eat are combinations of two or three of those. For example, milk contains all three: carbs, protein, and fat. In fact, if we're talking about real food, whole, unprocessed foods, there really are hardly any foods that are 100% carbohydrate. Maybe honey or maple syrup. Um, but typically when we use the term carb, referring to a food, we mean a food that is mostly carbohydrate. Okay, so carbohydrates, protein, and fat, these are our macronutrients. You've probably heard of micronutrients, okay? But those are things like vitamins, minerals. But carbohydrates, protein, and fat, these are our macronutrients. This is where our calories come from, the fuel that keeps us going. There are 4 calories in every gram of carbohydrates. So say you are eating a product and you look at the food label, because we're all looking at our food labels, right? We're all reading those labels. Good. Okay, so you look at the label and it says that 1 serving of this food gives you 10 grams of carbs. So you know that there are 4 calories in every gram. So 10 times 4, that's 40 calories. And protein is the same thing, 4 calories in every gram of protein. Fats are a little bit different. They're 9 calories in every gram of fats. That's why they usually contain more calories per weight than proteins or carbs. So carbohydrates are our primary fuel source. They're broken down in the body to glucose, and glucose is the main source of energy for our cells. So to answer the question, are carbs good or are they bad? The answer is yes. It depends on what kind of carbs they are. Some are extremely beneficial to our health, and some can be really very detrimental. So just to simplify things, there are basically 2 kinds of carbs. We have refined carbs and we have unrefined carbs. So back in the day, all carbs were unrefined, things like whole grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, beans, dairy foods. These are all foods that have a large carb component. We grew them, we picked them, we ate them. Simple. But now, due to modern technology and all the advances in manufacturing, we have taken carbs, some of our carbs, and modified them. We've refined them. because this enables the manufacturers to extend their shelf life and make a greater profit. There are two categories of these refined carbs. We have our refined sugars and we have our refined grains. Our refined sugars are things like white sugar, brown sugar, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup. Those are the main ones. There's lots of other ones, but those are the bulk of what's used. And those are called added sugars on your food labels. So our refined grains are things like white flour and all the millions of things made out of white flour, like white pasta, white breads, most crackers, all kinds of snacks and other baked goods. White flour is your all-purpose flour, and on food labels it's called enriched flour or wheat flour. And there are other kinds of refined grains besides wheat. There's like white rice is a refined grain. In the process of refining carbs, much of those nutrients get removed and just mostly empty calories are left. So, okay, so I'll show you. This is we see a whole grain here. This could be any grain like wheat or rice. It contains three parts. There's the bran, that's the outer layer, and you've probably heard that bran is really good for you. And the inner part is the germ. And the bran and the germ is where all the nutrients and the fiber, the antioxidants, the minerals, vitamins are. And in the refining process, the bran and the germ are removed, and all that's left is this the center white, fluffy, starchy part where the calories are, but not much of the nutrients. So really you can see that refined grains, they've had both the bran and the grain removed. They're just really two different foods for sure. So what are the main problems with eating refined carbs? There are really three main problems with eating a lot of refined carbohydrates. Number one, they provide a lot of calories, but not a lot of nutrients. They're what we call empty calories. And because they don't contain any fiber, they don't fill us up, so it's very easy to eat a lot of them very quickly. That's the first problem. The second problem is that refined carbs are so concentrated that they actually have a similar effect on the body as a drug might. In fact, white sugar, for example, stimulates the same areas in the brain that cocaine does. And that's why they have this addictive effect. That's why we crave them. The more we eat them, the more we want to eat them. Okay, that's problem number two. Problem number three is that refined carbs cause these major swings in our blood sugar levels. They're so concentrated and they're digested so quickly that the body has to respond rapidly and just kind of ends up overcompensating. And that's why there's this high blood sugar spike followed by this nosedive, this blood sugar crash. And this causes like not only like mood swings and irritability, these blood sugar swings, they also cause inflammation in the body. And inflammation is usually the root cause of most of our chronic diseases. These blood sugar swings also cause insulin resistance, which is also associated with heart disease and diabetes. So basically, the more refined carbs we eat, the greater our risk for chronic disease. Okay, well, let's get to the more encouraging stuff, the unrefined carbohydrates. Where do unrefined carbs fit into a healthy diet? So where refined carbohydrates cause problems, unrefined or complex carbs, they do the opposite. So where refined carbs are empty calories, unrefined carbs are nutrient dense, meaning a lot of bang for your buck, lots of nutrients packed into fewer calories. So where refined carbs are addictive and cause us to eat more, unrefined are filling and satisfying, and they help us not to overeat. Where refined carbs increase our health risks, unrefined carbs, you guessed it, they reduce them. Okay? So it's because of all the health risks of eating refined carbs that all carbs have just, they've gotten thrown under the bus. And all the low carb diets are just all the rage now. But this is actually not something, this is not a new thing. Um, if you study dietetics and nutrition, you will find that since carbs began to be refined, that was like the 1800s, there has been this continual cycle of diet plans for weight control. And whether it's been low carb, low fat, low protein, high protein, everything else, these diets just cycle through every few years with different names. We get excited about these new quick weight loss diets. They get really popular. Some celebrity promotes them. But then they gradually fade out as we realize, hey, they really don't work in the long run. And then we forget about them and we move on to the next new quick weight loss diet, which is often the same thing as the past fad diets, just with a new name. Excuse me. Okay, so for example, starting like in the 1800s, we've had about 30 major popular low carb diets with names like the alkaline diet, the cabbage soup diet, my favorite, the eat fat, grow slim diet. There's Stillman's, Atkins, Scarsdale, Paleo, Zone, South Beach, Whole 30, on and on and on. And currently we have lots, excuse me, lots of variations on the ketogenic diet or the keto diet. So I'll get to these questions in just a minute. I'm going to get to those. Great. Thank you for the questions. That's exciting. So what exactly is a ketogenic diet? A keto diet is a diet that puts the body into ketosis. Okay, well, what is ketosis? Well, remember that carbohydrates are the primary fuel source for the body. They're broken down in the body to glucose, and glucose is the main source of energy for our cells. So if we're not eating enough carbs, and usually that means about 50 grams of carbs a day, if we're not eating enough, our cells start to become starved for glucose, so the body starts using fat. It turns it into an alternative fuel source called ketone bodies or ketones. It's an extremely complex chemical process, has many, many, many steps. When the body first goes into ketosis, we can experience things like headache, bad breath, brain fog, weakness, muscle cramps, fatigue, insomnia, skin rashes, constipation, diarrhea. And if we stay in a state of ketosis long term, maybe several weeks or more, then we may develop vitamin and mineral deficiencies, bone loss, GI problems, increased risk for various chronic diseases such as heart arrhythmias, osteoporosis, kidney damage, cancer. Ketogenic diets, as I mentioned before, they're not new. So since the 1920s, keto diets, they've been used to treat epilepsy. And it's usually in children who have not responded to medication. So they found in some children who have epilepsy, the keto diet can sometimes reduce the number of seizures. But they don't even know like why it works or how it works. So why are low carb diets so popular for weight loss? Okay, well, we want a quick fix. We really do. We want to do something drastic. lose weight really quickly. We're always looking for that magic bullet. And one of the main reasons why low carb or keto diets keep cycling back around is that there is often a significant initial weight loss on a low carb diet. But the problem is, and this is really important because this is the part that often gets overlooked, and that is that this initial rapid weight loss is mostly due to the loss of three things: glycogen, water, and muscle. So not so much from losing fat. Okay, glycogen, that's the stored energy in our muscles that fuels our muscles, and that comes from the carbohydrates that we eat. And when we're not eating an adequate amount of carbohydrates, our muscles quickly use up that stored glycogen. And when the glycogen is gone, and especially if we're not eating enough protein, then we start losing muscle. And when we lose muscle, we lose water because muscle tissue contains a lot of water. Fat tissue doesn't contain very much water. So that initial weight loss that we experienced is not really much of a true fat weight loss. It's mostly just the loss of the weight of the glycogen, the weight of the muscle, and the weight of the water. And once that's gone, what happens is then we will usually experience a plateau. This is often when I start seeing my clients. They've been on a keto diet, they've been on a low carb, and they stop losing weight, and they say, what do I do? Well, with low carb or keto diets, what typically happens is they're just really hard to sustain. And when we go off of them, we end up quickly gaining back the weight plus more than we lost. And having our weight go up and down a lot is actually a greater health risk than just being overweight and maintaining that weight. So the bottom line is that any effective, healthy weight loss plan, it has to be a balanced eating plan that includes all the food groups, has to include exercise, and it has to be a plan that we can sustain the rest of our life. There's really no shortcut to healthy eating. There's no safe, healthy way to lose more than about 1 pound of fat a week. And we need to be very wary of anything that promises us anything different. And there's a lot out there promising us just that. So don't fall for it. The huge bulk of all the research done to determine what kind of diet is the healthiest, what kind of diet helps us achieve and maintain a healthy weight, live long and prosper, the research always comes back to the same thing. I call them the 7 components of wellness. So the healthiest people gratefully enjoy an active life and a variety of real food with balance and moderation. And each one of those words is a key component of good health. So how do we do that? How do we gratefully enjoy an active life with a balance of real food and moderation? So specifically, how many carbs do we really need, and how do they fit into the healthiest diet we can have? So we need a balance of carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And a great range to shoot for is for carbs to provide 45 to 65% of our calories. Protein should provide about 20 to 35%, and fats should provide an additional 20 to 35% of our calories. So these ranges, these were determined based on what the body's needs are. There are very specific purposes for each one of those macronutrients in the body. So for example, we need carbs for fuel, we need protein for growth and tissue repair, we need fats to produce things like hormones, and we use ranges as opposed to set numbers to allow for variations in individuals' metabolism, because our metabolism can be affected by lots of different factors like activity level, age, genetics, etc. So we use a range. So how can we plan our meals to achieve this balance? It sounds so complicated. Fortunately, it's not, and there's a really great way, a really easy way to do that without calculating anything. Um, it's called My Plate. I love this, and I use it for almost all my clients because it's a great visual representation of what to include in a healthy meal. And you notice it has all the food groups, and we want to make half of our plate vegetables and fruit. I'm backwards here. Half of our plate vegetables and fruit. We want to make a quarter of our plate protein and a quarter of our plate whole grains. And then we want to add a component of dairy. And this is just a really easy way to make sure we're getting all of our macronutrients in the right proportions and all of our micronutrients too. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and I've already got some coming in, which is really great. And I'll just spend the rest of our time answering any questions that come in. Okay. Can you lose weight while eating carbohydrates in all of your meals? Absolutely. Absolutely. And like we see here, whole grains has carbohydrates in them, vegetables and fruits and dairy, they all contain carbs. So if we're cutting out carbs, we're really having an unbalanced diet. So as long as we're focusing on those unrefined carbohydrates, yes, and we're not eating more calories than we need, we can balance of carbohydrates. Good question. Okay, is fat better than carbs for performance? Have you heard about the keto diet? Okay, I think I covered that. Yeah, we need that balance. And I gave the percentage there, like 45 to 60% carbs, 20 to 35% protein, 20 to 35% fat. We need that balance there. Great question. Okay, what are the top 5 foods that are best for carbohydrates that I can integrate into my daily diet? Oh, I love that question. Good question. Well, we'll go back to the plate. So dairy, we've really gotten away from drinking milk. Even kids are not drinking milk anymore, and that's really causing a problem with osteoporosis, bone health. Every diet needs to include a good source of calcium, and there's no better source than milk or yogurt. Many vegetables and fruits and grains all have carbs in them. Okay, whole grains like whole wheat, whole rice, brown rice, quinoa, oatmeal. Those are highly nutritious grains to include, carbs to include. So is a low-carb diet bad for our health? Yes, like I explained, if you are not getting those 50 grams of carbohydrates, then your body will it kind of goes into a starvation mode. And what happens is it starts holding on to every calorie that it gets because it knows it's starving. So it kind of backfires and has the opposite effect. So we really need that balance of all the food groups. There's some questions about whole grains. Let's see, you said the refining process, most of the nutrients are removed, but don't they add them back in, and that's why it's called enriched flour? Oh, great question. So whole wheat flour has at least 20 very key nutrients, okay? And they're actually finding more all the time. I was just reading an article about 2 new compounds in whole wheat flour that have significant health benefits. Okay, let me show you a chart. This is really helpful, I think. So with a whole grain, that's the green that you see. This is like 100% of the nutrition in a whole grain. When they refine it and turn it into, say, white flour, then the pink is left. You can see how hardly any of the nutrients are left. And when they enrich it, they do add in only 5. They only add 5 of the nutrients back in. So refined flours, they're just a mere shadow of their former selves, really. They don't compare nutritionally at all to a whole grain. They also lose 25% of their protein. So we really want to focus on those unrefined carbohydrates. Okay, what's the difference between whole grain and whole wheat? I get asked this question a lot. It's kind of like the question, what's the difference between a carrot and a veggie? So a carrot is a veggie, but not all veggies are carrots. So whole wheat is a whole grain, but the term whole grain does not always mean whole wheat, because whole grain is a general term telling you that whatever grain is in that product is whole. There are other whole grains beside wheat. We've got brown rice, oatmeal, whole grain rye, whole grain barley, whole grain cornmeal, popcorn is a whole grain. I actually learned something new about grains recently. Three of my favorite grains, quinoa, buckwheat, amaranth, they're technically not grains, they're actually seeds. But they're still highly nutritious, complex carbs that we want to include in our meals. Delicious, nutritious. Okay, another question. How can you tell if a food is whole grain? Okay, on the food label, you have to look in the ingredients and it has to say the word whole or whole grain in front of the grain. For example, whole rye flour or whole grain cornmeal. What if we see the words multigrain on a package? Does that mean whole grain? Not necessarily. All multigrain means is that there's more than one type of grain in that product. It doesn't tell you whether those grains are refined or not. So you have to read the label and see if you see that word whole on it or not. If a label says wheat flour or enriched flour, those are not whole grains. Those are refined carbohydrates, refined grains. Degerminated cornmeal is not whole grain. Like the name says, the germ has been removed. The bran has been removed also, so it's been refined. How many grams of whole grains do we need in a day? We need at least 50 grams, okay? Depending on how big or how old a person is, that it'll vary a little bit, but at least 50 grams of whole grains a day. If you are interested in learning more about whole grains, there's this great website called wholegrainscounsel.org. I love it, but that might just be because I'm a real food nerd. But I think it's super interesting. Okay, another question. Is it better to eat a hamburger without a bun or with a bun? Well, I'd say if the buns available are not whole grain, then maybe eating the burger bunless is a healthier option. If you have a whole grain bun and you haven't gotten your 50 grams of whole grains in that day, then I'd probably go for the bun. Is there a kind of whole grain bread that you recommend? Yes, I do. I love Dave's Killer Bread. It's a weird name, but I get the organic variety it's 21 whole grains and seeds. And if you've never read Dave's Killer Bread story, you've got to Google it and read it because he was an ex-con and he got out and he started making bread. And the bread is delicious. It's got 22 grams of whole grain. And if you get the thin sliced, it has only 60 calories per slice. Also, if you want to explore the whole grain world more, Bob's Red Mill products are a great place to go. They've got all kinds of marvelous whole grain flours, cereals, baking products. I would love to go to the Bob's Red Mill World Tour someday. Google it, it's awesome. But it's in Oregon, so it may be a while before I can do that. It looks like that's about all the questions we have, so I think we'll close for now. Thank you all so much for joining us and watching. I hope it was helpful. I hope, and if you have any more questions about anything related to nutrition or wellness, please don't hesitate to contact me on the Kounsel app. Thanks for joining me. Bye now.